Hi, thank you for joining us today at the CISO Forum here at CyberX. I'm really excited to have a panel of three very different people to talk with us about striking the balance between technical and operational skills in cybersecurity. My name is Shelley Wark-Martyn, and I traveled here to CyberX this week from Calgary, Alberta. I work with SANS Training Institute and have met several of these people on Zoom calls for the last year and a half, and hoping in the future we can do some more in-person events. I do have one person with me in person today. So Graeme, we're going to start with you, and if you could give us a bit of an introduction, talk about your role a bit, and how you balance technical and operational skills in what you do.
Thank you. I'm Graeme Barrie. I'm president and founder of Netmechanics, and my main role is vCISO. We provide CISO services for SaaS startups, fast scaling small businesses. So I help them build their security programs. In a lot of cases, with them building SaaS programs, they're very technical. So I'm having to bridge the gap. I'm constantly learning because, like I said earlier, I wouldn't know a Kubernetes pod if I tripped over it. So I'm having to learn a lot of the technical as I go because it's been a few years since I've been in the technical space. So I'm helping them more with the operations side and doing that translation.
Okay, great. Okay, we're going to move over to Victoria now. Victoria, can you give us an introduction and how this impacts you in your work and your knowledge?
Oh, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria. I'm president of the IT Square Toronto chapter. I'm also a founder of Cybertron Conference, and I currently work in cybersecurity at a fan company, but I've held a couple of previous roles in a variety of fields, including incident management, remediation, and cybersecurity awareness. And in all my prior roles were all cross-functional. I had to deal very closely with the business, with different areas like legal and privacy, and folks that were not technical, so they did not they didn't have the technical knowledge in cybersecurity. So I was always the person who was in the middle and for serving as the communicator between the technical and non-technical groups. And it's very interesting to have that kind of role because you get exposure to both. You get to learn about the problems that the business side, the non-technical folks are facing, as well as the technical folks, and being able to run cross-functional problem solving like that is extremely rewarding. And yeah, it's definitely been something I enjoyed about working in this field.
Kind of like the mediator facilitator role. So,
oh, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Okay, John, you're next. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks. I'm John Pinard. I'm the Vice President of Information Technology at UJA Federation of Greater Toronto. And prior to that, I was the CIO at Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority, which was a government regulator working with the Ministry of the Environment. So my role is not a CISO, but I have for a number of years acted as both head of IT as well as the in-house CISO to ensure that everybody is maintaining while they're focusing on the technical aspects and the operational aspects, but also making sure that cybersecurity is a part of everything that we build. That it's great that the technical resources can come out with some brilliant ideas on how to handle operational requests, but invariably they don't have the focus on that cyber piece. How do you make sure that what you're implementing is secure? And so that's really the role that I typically play in both of these organizations.
Great. Well, from your experience, and you're all very different in your experience, when you look at the CISOs that you've talked with, looking for either training for their teams or themselves, or even in your businesses where you're talking with other CISOs, either in an advisory way or as a partner, what skills would you say, and this is like the great debate, every conference will give you a different answer to this, but I'm always interested in hearing people's perspectives. What skills do you think it is important that a CISO bring to the table or recognize that they have or don't have? Who wants to start? John?
Sure, I'll start out. I think I guess my opinion on this would be that they have to be kind of a big picture thinker. That it's cybersecurity is critical. Security in general is critical, but you also have to be able to balance it with the needs of the business and the technical capabilities of the systems. And so how do you determine what the best solution is that will meet the needs of the business from an operational standpoint, meet the needs of IT from a technical standpoint, but also ensure that there is ample security in place to protect the data, protect the systems. And that becomes a really a bit of a juggling act that, it's everybody in that picture needs to kind of look at things that it's a give and take, that you may only get 80% of what you're looking for, but you're nearly getting everything you want, but you're also ensuring that you have ample security in place and that the technical costs aren't exorbitant to try to meet that.
Okay. Graeme, I'm going to let you go next.
Can you repeat the question? I was just so engrossed with John's
Yeah, I was
reply.
I was asking about, and you would meet a different clientele, I think, as well. When you're looking at, talking about who's going to be a CISO, what skills should a CISO have, what does that conversation look like? In your experience, what would you say is like, this is a skill that they have or that they look for? Maybe it's a skill they look for that you don't think they really need to have.
I think it really is all over the map. I work with a lot of other virtual CISOs. I'm involved with a couple organizations for vCISOs, and it's across the spectrum. Like, some are coming from a technical background. I have a technical background.
Mm-hmm.
I made the move into the business arena, but some of my peers, they come from a GRC background and more the regulatory and compliance. And personally, I think the technical aspect for my business is a big driver, because I can speak with the developers of the products and ask probing questions and get them to think of the answers, so they kind of see things from my perspective and maybe look at security as not being thou must, and have the light bulbs go off on their own and start baking the security in.
So having that good team around them.
Yeah.
Okay, Victoria, what are you hearing on the training side for CISOs
sure.
or organizations?
For sure. And I wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit of what Graeme just said, is that, cybersecurity is such a relatively new field. And I felt when I was working for a small company, there was a big gap that I had to bridge in terms of getting management buy-in to say that cybersecurity is truly important. We need to make this one of the focuses of this organization. We need to start thinking about this seriously. And one of the things that I found that some folks did start seeing me as an in-house cybersecurity person as police, and then so as thou shalt be careful of phishing links. But so as soon as I started feeling that a bit of a shift in that perspective, I focused and doubled down really on the relationship building aspect and making sure that I fostered the right relationships throughout with the stakeholders to make sure that cybersecurity, the function, is acting as a partner and not as an enforcer. So with that, I was just gonna add on that relationship building as a skill is extremely, extremely important. I find in leadership, but not just in leadership, but also in the teams doing the work as well, and the folks, especially in roles that are by nature cross-functional, like incident response and incident management. But absolutely in the training side. So for example, so IC Squared, for folks who might not be familiar, is a cybersecurity certification consortium, and the Toronto chapter is a chapter of IC Squared, and we do educational events, and a lot of our events are do have a balance of technical skills and technical topics, as well as a focus on, with each event, we have a portion that talks about soft skills and soft skill development, because it's so important to practice those skills and learn them, because they take such a long time to learn. That's not something that you can grasp in a few days at all. So yeah, definitely something that is a emerging focus, I could say.
Great, thanks. I'm going to pick up on the relationship skills, because as we all know, March 2020, COVID hit, and the CISOs woke up with a new problem. And if they didn't, they were probably in trouble. So in your experience in going through COVID, it changed the operations for a lot of organizations. I know organizations as of today that still do not use their work email addresses for security reasons. So I'm going to start with you, Graeme, and just share with the audience some of the things that you kind of, had to deal with organizations that maybe could have been preventative, and some of the things that were a result of COVID hit and everybody was in the same ballpark and these were our issues.
Yeah, that's it. I've worked with some organizations, they were already remote first, so it wasn't that much of a challenge for them. Others, it was overnight, they went from one central office to having 40 remote offices, and they probably still aren't the most secure organizations. I think, yeah, it's definitely been a mind shift in how to do business. Getting back to the idea of the building the relationships, I think that's the most critical thing is having the relationships and the means to collaborate, to keep the dialogue going, and we're not all off in our own little bubbles, and to keep that security dialogue first and foremost. I know a lot of organizations I'm working with, I continually try to spur that conversation amongst their Slack channels and team groups, and just to keep the conversation going and keep security in a bit of the forefront.
Yeah, I find that with being a member of CyberX and with SANS and then ISC Squared and other organizations, there is a great like a kinship almost that happens when people are like all of a sudden they're stuck, and it's like there's no shame in this game, right? Because nobody wants the breach. So John, in your experience, COVID, what's changed for CISOs? How are organizations doing out there?
Well, I'm going to touch on something that Graeme and Victoria both talked about. And Graeme talked about, March 2020, when everybody went from, working in the office to being 100% remote. And Victoria's comment about the relationship building, that, in moving, when everybody was in the office, it's a lot easier to control things, right? It's a lot easier to make sure that people are only doing certain things. But when you've got people working 100% from home, where you don't necessarily have any control over what kind of internet connection they have or what security they have in place, it really becomes a much bigger issue and a bigger problem to deal with. And for the relationship side of it, is that you really have to, as a CISO, have to build those relationships with all of the staff to help them to understand that fighting against cybersecurity is not just a CISO's responsibility. It's the entire organization's responsibility. And I mean, cybersecurity and security in general can be anything from somebody downloading data into an Excel file and keeping it on their personal machine, to somebody hacking in. And people don't understand that from a business perspective under normal circumstances. They go, you know what, I'm going to download this data so I can work on it offline and whatever. But it becomes a real issue. A little anecdotal from a number of years ago, an organization that I worked at, that we had a salesperson with a laptop that didn't feel like carrying it onto a plane. So she checked it as luggage and couldn't understand why, when she got to the other end, her bag was there, but the laptop was missing. And, so that becomes a huge issue. Now, if we hadn't encrypted the laptop, we would have been in a much bigger situation than we ended up being in. But people need to understand, even just from a phishing standpoint, the thought of always make sure you think twice before you click once. And, trying to convey that to the user community, because a CISO can't sit there looking over everybody's shoulder all the time to make sure that they don't click on things. So I think the relationship building, helping people to help to bring the business under your wing, I think is critical.
Yeah. And that example that you used was a couple of years ago, you said, but that still happens today, where you hear people took their laptops home and left them in the car, and somebody broke into their car and took their laptop, right? So, and I think of times where I've just walked around somewhere and it's like there's laptops out and none of them are locked up, and I'm like, I could just pick that up and walk away with it, and who knows what I would have. So just that common sense security, when you have people working at home, if they're working with information that's confidential, who else in your household is accessing your computer, your laptop, and looking at them? I mean, some people let their kids get on or whatever. It's like, oh no, you could be in trouble. So just knowing that. How about you, Victoria? Anything to add to this as far as conversations you've heard for workplaces, for training?
Sure. I just wanted to comment on what John just said. Think twice, click once. It reminds me of that saying, measure 7 times and cut once. But it's such a important concept to kind of embed in the organizational culture that cybersecurity is everyone's job. Like, everyone is responsible for keeping the entire organization safe. And one of the things that I've found is kind of a little bit of a mystery to me, which I'm hopefully will be researching. I'm doing just some context. I'm doing a PhD part-time in psychology and cybersecurity, because I really want to understand, how can we help humans, I feel like I'm talking like an alien, the humans, how can we help ourselves, through decision-making, so that even when we're under stress and we're multitasking and for example, we're working from home, COVID situation, and there's so many other distractions, what can we do to help our teammates think critically about the things that they're seeing, and not, taking phishing emails at face value, not taking phishing phone calls, and giving up information, and not acting outside of the boundaries out of convenience, for example, or just to get their jobs done. What can we do to make life easier for ourselves to be more secure? So anyway,
Do you have any answers
I'll keep you
to that
updated.
question? Yeah, because I mean that's a great question for the panel, because I think as we live in what I call our COVID world now, we're so isolated as well, that's a great question. Who's having that conversation? Who is the CISO talking to? Is the CISO able to get that audience when everybody is just kind of working in their own bubbles and you're blocking your spot? John, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. For the organization that I work at now, we've actually moved to a hybrid work environment. So we're working a couple of days a week in the office. So that's a little bit easier, but you still don't get everybody in the office, and you still don't have the time to make sure that you can have sort of FaceTime with everybody. So it's difficult, and I think a lot of what I think we all have to think outside of the box of ways to be able to share this information. Putting it on corporate intranet sites, making sure that there's routine emails, but not frequent enough that people go, oh yeah, it's another one of those, and they just ignore it. There has to be ways of putting a little flash in it, so somebody goes, oh, that's cool, and opens it. Something that helps to tweak that. And I think one of the things that, as Victoria was talking earlier, kind of tweaked for me is that to me, CISOs are almost educators, because CISOs aren't, as I said, they're not the ones that are sitting there preventing somebody from pressing the enter button. They need to be the ones that are educating the business to understand the implications of every keystroke they hit, and ways to have them think before they click about Gee, I don't recognize who's sending me this email, but hey, it's got a link that I can save $20 off my next purchase. Gee, maybe it's not for real. And so I think the education side of things is critical, because you almost have to be that little CISO sitting on somebody's shoulder when they're sitting at home working, and as they go to hit something, have the mini CISO saying, "Don't click on that." So I think it's trying to continually share information from a CISO to the business of the consequences, essentially, of what they're doing, and how do you make it so that it's second nature for people, so that they go, "Oh, hey, wait a second, before I do that, I better call help desk, or I better think twice about doing it, or I don't recognize who that user is, I'm just going to delete the email."
Wow. Yeah.
And so I think that's critical from a CISO standpoint as an educator.
Yeah. How about you, Graeme?
Yeah, I think that the educator part is key. During COVID, I think I did more workshops than I have ever done, just because of the handiness of Zoom. And I did presentations with small business organizations, basically from Niagara Falls to North Bay and everywhere in between. But the one thing I noticed was there really is with everyone working remotely, it was how do you reach everybody and how do you make it engaging? And last year at Christmas, I did a cybersecurity advent calendar. So every day I recorded a short video, and I made sure it went out to the organizations I was working with to share with their family members, and it grew and grew, and people were messaging and go, "Geez, that's a great idea. I see these emails all the time," or "I didn't know this could be a scam," and with holiday shopping, and so it really is about the education, and it's getting it to resonate with them. So you use those at home scenarios that they can then bring back into the office.
Yeah. I once.
I'd just like to jump in for one
Go
sec,
ahead.
Shelley, to say that those little snippets that Graeme was talking about, I saw them last year and I thought they were phenomenal.
Yeah.
And Graeme, I'm certainly hoping to see them again this year.
I'm going to do them again this year. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Good.
I mean, I think when you're looking at who your audience is, who your workforce is, working from home, there's only so much we can usually take in a day, and information. And I remember this one company, they phoned in a panic because they needed to get their people trained in introduction to security. I'm like, really? Why do your people need that? I mean, they're pretty smart, like tech people, like security people. No, it's our frontline people. And so we put them through the course, and then I did some follow-up with them. And this one gal, she laughed, she said, that guy kept coming and telling me all these security issues. I didn't have a clue what he was talking about until I took the course and I took the training. But sometimes in workplaces, we forget about the entire workplace. We're only dealing with, they think you got to deal with your team and we're the only ones that need to worry about security. And it's like, no, we need to worry about everyone, including the client or the customer that comes through the door. So in talking about that and worrying about everyone, how do you see, or what's your experience in dealing with others outside your business unit when you talk about security, training? Sometimes when you're peers, sometimes it's hard to get them to think they need any training in that because, you look after that. So why would they need any training? What do those conversations look like? Because that's, getting them engaged at the board level or the funding level to support either new hires, training for the team, training for the organization. Graeme? I'm going to start with you.
I have that look of bewilderment on my face.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, again, it goes by, sector or whoever your customer is. Like when I'm working with a lot of manufacturing organizations, their customers could be, other manufacturers. So they're part of a supply chain. So the most thing I hear from them is, "Oh, no, we don't have to worry about security. We're a manufacturer." Well, you probably have to worry about it the most.
Right.
But in terms of like public-facing customers, I like to tell some of the organizations that are public-facing that, you know, just the simple credit card transactions to, you know, work with the cards a little more securely and try to teach the little hygiene habits that they can. You know, a lot of times it's just like, ugh, I don't have time to do that, or
Right.
what have you. But one of the other things I noticed is working with organizations, and if I'm reviewing their policies, and they'll have something spelled out, usually it's written by someone in the IT department, that, you know, encrypt your emails if it's sensitive data. So I'll ask the users, well, have you been trained on how to do any sort of encryption? And they're like, yeah, we don't even know what that means.
Yes.
Like, so
Yeah.
there's a gap there,
Yeah,
for sure.
That's common. Never
Yeah.
assume that everybody knows what the language that you speak,
Yeah,
even though
Yeah.
it's your everyday language.
yeah.
Okay, Victoria, anything to add to this question conversation as far as dealing with an entire organization versus just the security team or the IT folks?
Oh, for sure. And like, you know, I find on like the communication piece that we just talked about is big. Like it's so important to make sure that your audience understands exactly what you're talking about and breaking it down to the very fundamental pieces, but also focusing, and I find this works especially well when I'm just chatting casually, you know, on a one-on-one basis with non-cybersecurity employees. Is talking about the cool stuff, right? Like the so what, like what could go wrong? Like, because when we think about, for example, data loss prevention, you know, data loss prevention sounds very dry as a concept, you know. Okay, so we're trying to stop information from leaving. We don't want people to email out, for example, any sensitive information to their personal emails. So that as a rule is it's pretty dry. But what if we, you know, we keep going back to the so what, like what can go wrong? What can happen when to that information once it's out of the network, like, and actually explain and make it vivid for the person, because cybersecurity is really cool. Like it's such a cool field. That's why I kind of, once I fell into it, it's there's no escape for me. This is it's holding me. My heart's in it forever. But it's because it's so cool. So if we're able to, and I really like the advent calendar idea, Graeme, that is such a cool thing to have. Is like a daily, you know, snippet of information that is so vivid and so memorable that it sticks in people's minds. So if we focus our marketing, you can say on, you know, on the so what to make people care, but also make people interested about the, you know, the consequences, because they can be quite wild, you know, that those stories are and anecdotes can be quite memorable. You know, will go a long way, I think.
Okay, John, you're next. And you know, remembering that it's easy to catch people's attention when you're at work, when you're at the water cooler, just having conversation. Now, with everybody working remote, most of your people are working at home. So how do you have those conversations? Like, you know, how do you get to where you need to get to ensure that as a CISO or a lead, that your organization is being looked after? John?
So I'm going to touch on two things, if I may. One is talking about the other divisions of the business.
Yeah.
But the other piece that I'm going to talk about is with my previous organization, where we were a government regulator. We actually had businesses that were registering online with us and making payments, and these were small manufacturers or small, you know, auto dealers and so forth, that they're going, well, I don't want to use my credit card on this website. And so it was also about educating them. So I'll talk a bit. So what we did internally was, obviously, as I said before, it's that relationship building to make sure that everybody within the organization works sort of as a team to combat against cybersecurity issues or cyber risks. And you know, in doing that, you take an individual that's preaching cybersecurity and turn that into an entire organization that is cyber aware. And so that, to me, is, you know, unless you're going to hire a whole slew of cyber professionals, that's really the only way I think you can do it. So the other side of the fence, though, as I said, is that because we were a government regulator and we had, people were mandated to register with us and there was fees associated with it, that we also had to educate them on what we had put in place to ensure that their data was kept safe. That, if they were going to go onto our site and enter their credit card information, that we had to kind of educate them on what we had put in place in layman's terms, because these were the farthest from technical resources. We had to explain to them how we were protecting their data to make sure that their credit card information didn't end up in the abyss, that somebody could pick up and use, to make them more comfortable with the system that we had built and that they were mandated to use. So I think that's, that side of this equation for that business was critical.
Yeah.
And, even in the organization that I'm in now, we do fundraising and people will make donations, and some of those donations are done by credit card. And so the same deal, that we need to make sure that they're aware that, we're not just asking for their credit card in the wide open web, that it's secured, and here's what we do with that information once it comes in, and just so that you're easing their comfort level. So not only are you trying to make your own staff aware of the implications of a security breach, but you're also educating your customers, in this case, or the registrants, of how you're protecting the data that they're providing you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And just to get them to understand that whenever you're collecting information, regardless of how innocent it is, where you put it down, where you place it, what system it's in, it could get into anybody's hands. And you just never want to be the news story, right? You just never want to be that news story, because there are some news stories you never forget. So looking at, and one of our talks, I believe it's tomorrow, it's kind of the CISO of the future. So knowing that we've just had like 18 months of pure change in our lives for all kinds of reasons, but technology has played a big role in our lives on, how we get food delivered, how we do our banking, like, you can't go in, how we show our COVID ID shots now, like everybody is using technology and using their information. So when you look at today's organizations and being a CISO, what's changed in 18 months?
Oh, I'm going to start, if I may.
You may.
I think one of the
like...
things, you've talked about a number of these things that, the new systems that have been put in place and the way that we do business. In the mall near my house, the number of stores that have closed is just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. But it's because people are doing all their shopping, or a large chunk of their shopping, online. And they're buying lunch and dinner and groceries and everything else online. And I think that the next piece, and I think one of the things from a CISO standpoint, is going to be, wow, we've got all of this new technology that has been put in place over the last 18 months, that some of it has been compromised, but there's an awful lot of stuff that's still out there that's yet to be compromised.
Right.
And I think that the CISOs need to be on their game to try and stay on top of those, to try and be ahead of the game if you can. I mean, it is so difficult to stay ahead of these hackers, but it's I think that's where the hacking of old, I'll call it old technology, has been around. This is all new technology. It's new, more and more people that are throwing up online stores and things to try and stay in business, and making sure, Graeme, you're going to be busy, because you can start going out to all of these small shops that have gone online, and helping them to make sure that they are not only online, that they can stay online because they stay secure. Because as you said, Shelley, you don't want to be the next story.
No. Well, and
right?
I think, Graeme, I'm going to turn this over to you now, because a lot of our public organizations or schools or doctors' visits, a lot of them are being done remote now as well. Gathering of data at the dentist office. Everybody's got a computer now. So what do the people in charge of those organizations as CISOs, what do they need to worry about?
I think if we're still looking at the 18 months out, I think data is going to be the key. As we're moving more towards the online service delivery and things like that, I think the CISOs need to have an understanding right at the get-go of where the data is and where it's traveling and what is the workflow. Because a lot of these small organizations, they're using cloud apps to do patient records and charting and what have you. So I think you need to have an understanding of where the data is coming in and where is it going and where is it residing. And I think that's going to be much more critical, especially as we go into the idea of super apps and, more reliance on APIs and things like that, where I think that's going to be more the focus is the data and the identities.
That's going to be a challenge. Victoria, have you noticed anything different as far as, ISC squared and the training perspective and the demands from your side?
Sure, I can actually talk a little bit about how the chapter's operations had to drastically change from February to March 2020. We were always an in-person event type organization, and one of the big kind of values that we provide to our members is networking and relationship building amongst each other, because to drive each other's careers forward. Like, it's very much in the networking piece. And I remember thinking in March, I was just watching kind of like everything kind of closed down little by little, and thinking, okay, we need to get ahead of this. We need to figure out a way to still keep providing that same value to our members without losing that sense of community, and without losing, of course, not losing any of the educational content and the way they provide that, but also that intangible thing, like that relationship building aspect. And so for that, I quickly created a Slack platform for us to network on. And when we started doing the Zoom meetings, I carved out a portion every time for us to have a networking session. It's not the same, of course, because we have, if we are all on the same screen at the same time, can't really have multiple conversations going on the same all at once. But it's still still doing our best to retain that sense of community, and it's worked. But for sure, there's definitely been challenges in trying to keep that same sense of togetherness. And but I guess it's worked because we've had a big influx of volunteers, people very passionate about driving the chapter's objectives forward. So overall it's been great, but definitely a big shift in perspective.
Great. That brings back to organizations such as yours, John, and the ones that you work with, Graeme. What are they doing to keep their staff? The CISO has to be worried about keeping all their teams these days, because there's a lot of opportunities. There's the conversation of, if I have to go back to the office, I'm not going back to that workplace. So what is the CISO thinking about when he's thinking about my team?
You're right. I mean, I think that it's critical because, you're right. People don't necessarily want to go back to work. I have people now that have said, I would much rather just stay at home. There was, and I mean, it wasn't CISO specific, but there's been surveys out there, and they talked about 1 out of 3 said that they'd look for a new job if they had to go back to work or like back into the office full time. And so I think it's keeping people excited about their work. It's not the same old. And, as we've talked about, there are a whole bunch of new threats coming in, and there's all kinds of other areas to be looking at that I think you need to make sure that you keep people motivated in their job. I think that the ability to enable people to work where they need to work, which isn't necessarily saying, you can work from home 5 days a week, but I think some more flexibility in the ability to work in in a variety of places. And I think that the other piece too is yeah, I mean, it's always about money. That I think that these are, it's like if you go back a number of years ago when SAP was big, that you could ask essentially anything you wanted from a salary standpoint if you were an SAP technical person, because you'd get it. And the same thing with Salesforce. And I think that this is something else, that CISOs that are they're worth their weight in gold to make sure that organizations stay safe.
Yeah, they certainly have a lot to keep them up at night now.
Yes.
Graeme, do you want to add to this conversation? What's the CISO worrying about?
I'm fortunate with the clients I work at or work with that they're scaling quickly. So they're hiring huge numbers of people, like very quickly and globally. So I'm having to wrestle, geographical challenges of, like, say, privacy regulations and what have you, let alone time zones for Zoom meetings.
Yes.
But I think there needs, this is just me speaking from putting on my previous director hat and working with a group of people, is the ability to work whenever and wherever. I think that mentality needs to come in for a lot of cases. That you don't need to be the boss with the thumb on them and say you're going to work 9 to 5. And people are realizing that now in the last 18 months they are more productive later in the day rather than first thing in the morning, and they get more accomplished. So I think we need to embrace that. It's not going to work for everywhere, but I think we'd be better off embracing that. And new technology's coming. I saw a thing the other day about there's jobs opening up for remote excavator operators. So
Yeah.
internet-enabled excavators. So there's a whole new security field for us.
Surgeries from around the world while you sit in another part of the world. Yeah, lots of changes. So what does a future of a CISO look like in your forecast? This is my last question to the group. So who wants to answer that? It was interesting. All the people that came to CyberX, to the conference and joined us, we got a special package with a gift, and one of them was a sweatshirt that said CISO. And I have 4 grandchildren. And of course, none of them knew what that word meant. So we talked about it as a job in the future. Well, some of them thought that was really cool because they could break things and cause chaos, which is what they know from their gaming and stuff, right? And I thought, that's interesting. So what do you think the CISO of the future is going to look like, or look for, or be? Who wants to start? Victoria.
I can say it's my hope that the CISO of the future will look like anyone with a background from different educational backgrounds and lots of relationship building skill.
Good. Okay. Graeme?
Yeah, that's something. I think the CISO of the future is still going to be an educator, whether it be talking to the board and using the words such as litigation and liability. But I think it's still going to be an educator. It's still going to be bridging the gaps between technical and operations and business. And I don't think that's ever going to change.
Okay. John?
And it's interesting. I was thinking about this as Victoria and Graeme were talking, and I think that there's the potential. I mean, CISO has typically always been a technical resource, right? That it's somebody that's doing other technical things, moving up into the CISO role. I have a feeling that you may start to see more business individuals moving into that CISO role, because it's about the utilization of technology to secure business. Right. And so it's working with your technical teams to find the solutions that meet the needs of the business. So I think you may find that you get people from the business side of the world starting to move into that role as well.
Cool. Wow. It's been a great afternoon, great conversation and thoughts. And, I don't think our thoughts are much different than many folks at home. It's just having the conversation and knowing that relationships are key as we go into a world where many of us spend our whole day with technology. You know, there's nobody at my coffee cooler or water cooler in the morning, just me. Usually my husband's gone to work. So it's like, who are you having those side conversations? Yet they're really important. The team building for keeping your teams and who's on your team and measuring their skill sets, different ways to make that happen for your organization so that you can retain your workforce and grow your workforce. And just lots of great ideas. And tomorrow, like I said, we have the conversation about the CISOs of the future, and we have some young people who will be joining us. So it'll be interesting to hear what their thoughts are on who that person is going to be and what they're looking for in the CISO of the future. So thanks, John and Victoria and Graeme, for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Shelley.
Shelley.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.